Norm Macdonald made you laugh, but what he really did was tell the truth sideways. And once you heard it, you couldn't unhear it. Olivia Newton-John crossed every format barrier there was: film, pop, country, and somehow made it all feel effortless. Kobe Bryant decided early on exactly who he was going to be, and then he just refused to be anyone else, every single day. Sidney Poitier walked into rooms that weren't built for him and changed what those rooms meant forever. Jimmy Buffett built an entire world out of a feeling, and millions of people chose to live in it. Gilbert Gottfried, relentless, singular, and completely himself, right up to the end. There is a question that has followed Oprah Winfrey for decades, one that she herself has never fully answered, and probably never will. How do you hold that much power without becoming something other than yourself? The question isn't flattering or unflattering. It is simply the unavoidable pressure that sits at the center of her life. Because at some point, sometime in the mid-1980s, somewhere between a Memphis radio booth and a Chicago television studio, she stopped being a broadcaster and became an institution. And institutions don't get to be fragile. That tension is where her story actually lives. She built the most watched daytime talk show in American television history, not by being slicker than her competitors, but by being more honest. When she disclosed her own history of sexual abuse on air in 1986, she didn't do it as a confessional gambit. She did it because a guest had just shared the same experience, and the alternative, sitting silently behind the professional wall, felt like a lie. The audience felt that. Ratings climbed. But more importantly, something shifted in the cultural contract of what television was allowed to say out loud. Oprah didn't just benefit from that shift, she created it. By the time the Oprah Winfrey Show reached its peak in the 1990s, it was drawing more than 20 million viewers a day in the United States alone, and it was syndicated in over 140 countries. The numbers are almost beside the point. What those numbers represented was a degree of parasocial trust that had no real precedent in broadcast media. When she recommended a book, it sold. When she endorsed a product, shelves cleared. When she challenged the beef industry on air in 1996, suggesting she'd never eat another hamburger after hearing about mad cow disease risks, cattle futures dropped and Texas cattlemen sued her for food defamation. She fought the case for 6 years. She won, and she went back to Texas to hear the verdict in person, which told you something about how she understood the weight of a fight worth having. The lawsuit was one of the first major tests of whether her power was real or performed. She showed up. She brought her production crew. She taped episodes of her show in Amarillo during the trial. She refused to treat the legal threat as something that required her to go quiet or go small. That instinct to move toward pressure rather than away from it would define her most significant professional decisions for the next 30 years. Consider what she chose to do with that trust. The Oprah Book Club, launched in 1996, became the single most powerful literary force in American publishing almost immediately. Authors who had been selling modestly found themselves with million-copy print runs almost overnight. Jonathan Franzen's public reluctance to embrace the selection of his novel The Corrections in 2001 generated a national conversation about cultural class literary snobbery, and who gets to decide what counts as serious art. Franzen eventually appeared on her show. She had already moved on to the next book. The club's long-term effect on American reading habits, particularly among demographics that had been largely ignored by the literary establishment, is not seriously disputed by anyone who studies it. Her production company, Harpo Productions, which she founded in 1986 and which she controls entirely, gave her something that almost no television personality of her era possessed: ownership. She didn't just appear on screens, she owned the content. She owned the format. She negotiated terms that kept her in control of her image and her work in ways that were genuinely unusual for the time, and especially unusual for a black woman in American media in the 1980 seconds. That structural decision compounded over decades. Harpo produced films, including the Academy Award-nominated Beloved in 1998, which she starred in and which she had spent a decade fighting to bring to the screen. The film underperformed commercially. She has spoken about that disappointment publicly and directly. But she did not stop producing. Harpo has since produced The Color Purple stage musical adaptation, and she served as a producer on the 2023 film version of The Color Purple, which earned more than $60 million domestically and brought new audiences to a story she had first helped bring to the screen as an actress in 1985. That through line, from actress to producer to financier to cultural architect, is not accidental. Each step was chosen, and each step was about control. Her move into cable television with OWN, the Oprah Winfrey Network, which launched in January 2011 as a joint venture with Discovery, was the most difficult professional chapter she has publicly described. The network struggled badly in its first 2 years. Ratings were poor, executives departed, there were reports of significant financial losses and internal dysfunction. She stepped in as CEO in 2011, made personnel changes, and restructured programming around original drama, most notably the Tyler Perry-produced series that found loyal audiences where the initial lifestyle programming had not. By 2015, OWN had become profitable. The turnaround was real, documented, and hard-won. She has said in interviews that those early years at OWN were among the most humbling experiences of her professional life. That is not a small admission from someone who spent 25 years being told, repeatedly, that she was incapable of professional failure. The political dimension of her influence has always been complicated to map. She has been selective about endorsements in a way that has frustrated allies and puzzled analysts. Her support for Barack Obama in the 2008 presidential primary, appearing at campaign events, delivering speeches in Iowa and South Carolina, was significant enough that researchers at the University of Maryland estimated it generated more than 1 million votes in the primary alone. She made that choice once. She did not make it routinely. When her name circulated as a potential presidential candidate following her speech at the 2018 Golden Globes, a speech about truth, justice, and the arc of moral change that brought the audience to its feet. She addressed it directly and said she was not running. She appeared at moments to genuinely weigh it. She concluded she was not the right person for that particular arena. That is a form of self-knowledge that is harder than it sounds in a culture that tends to reward ambition that doesn't know its own limits. Her philanthropic footprint has been built with the same structural logic as her media work, not scattered grants, but institution building. The Oprah Winfrey Leadership Academy for Girls, which she founded and personally funded in South Africa, and which opened in 2007, was designed to educate young women from disadvantaged backgrounds. When a dormitory matron was accused of abuse in the school's first year, she flew to South Africa, met with students and parents, and led the response personally. The accused employee was dismissed and later convicted. She did not distance herself from the institution or allow others to manage the crisis on her behalf. She went. The school has since graduated hundreds of students, many of whom have gone on to universities in South Africa and internationally. She has said that the academy represents the work she is most proud of. That claim appears consistent with how she allocates her personal time and attention. Her public conversation with wellness, personal development, and what she calls living your best life has been commercially enormous and also genuinely controversial. Her association with figures like Dr. Mehmet Oz and Dr. Phil McGraw, both of whom built national platforms through appearances on her show, has drawn criticism from medical and psychological communities who questioned the rigor and sometimes the accuracy of the advice being broadcast to tens of millions of people. Those are legitimate criticisms. They sit alongside an equally legitimate observation that she created sustained national conversations about mental health, trauma, and emotional literacy at a time when those topics were structurally excluded from mainstream media. The tension between those two realities doesn't resolve neatly. It is part of the actual record. Her investment in Weight Watchers, now WW, beginning in 2015 when she purchased a 10% stake and joined the board, was framed as personal alignment with a program that had helped her. It was also a financial decision that generated significant returns when the company's stock rose sharply following her announcement. She has been open about her relationship with her own body and weight in ways that have earned both connection and criticism from audiences across the spectrum of body politics. That conversation has never been resolved, and she has not tried to resolve it artificially. In 2021, her two-part interview with Prince Harry and Meghan, the Duchess of Sussex, for CBS, drew an audience of more than 17 million viewers in the United States alone, and more than 11 million in the United Kingdom. It was one of the most watched interview broadcasts of the decade. It generated diplomatic friction, royal institution response, and several weeks of sustained global news coverage. She did not frame herself as a journalist. She has consistently resisted that framing. What she did was create a space in which two people said things they had not said publicly before, and the world watched. That is a specific and repeatable skill that she has now exercised for 40 years. She remains a controlling stakeholder in Harpo Productions. She continues to exercise editorial influence over her media output. She launched a partnership with Apple TV+, through which she has produced documentary series and continued her book club in a new format, reaching audiences who no longer watch linear television. The platform changed. The mechanism of trust, the sense that her attention on something means it is worth your attention, did not. What makes Oprah Winfrey's story genuinely unusual is not the scale of what she achieved, though the scale is extraordinary. It is that she achieved it without ceding the thing that made it possible, the credible appearance, backed by enough real evidence that she is still the same person who sat across from that guest in 1986 and chose honesty over professionalism. Whether that is entirely true in every dimension of her life is a question she would probably say only she can answer. But the cultural agreement that it is true, that agreement is the foundation of everything she has built, and it has held under enormous pressure for a very long time. That story is not finished.